Hey, you're listening to Not Good Enough, an inadequate response to inadequate responses. I'm Mitch Alexander.
I'm Tom McLean.
I'm Tom Lang.
We are three inner city lefty Melbourne.
Hipsters, latte sipping?
Yeah, hipsters isn't a word I've heard for a while, but yes. And essentially we are, like most people, angry and frustrated at most things, I think, in particular, Australia's response to climate change, and we figured what better time than now for all of the international attention being paid to Australia to get into the podcast train.
Yeah, unlike most people, we have audio equipment.
Real shortage.
So we're as qualified as we need to be to talk into microphones, I think, to talk about.
Oh, yeah, I own an audio device, and I'm so scared.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It is frustration and fear driving us to essentially preach to the choir, preach to people who aren't in the choir, just essentially preach loudly.
I think that's the thing is like the getting out in front of do we really need another podcast?
No.
Like, oh no, God.
No, we don't.
I tell you what, I really don't want to do a podcast or go to a rally. I hate all this stuff. I want to stay home and play video games and die old.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we weren't given that luxury.
Yeah.
We're going to die young. So.
The Australian government has forced us to do this podcast.
Our promise to you is that Not Good Enough will finish as soon as Australia starts taking an adequate response to climate change.
I don't think I'm ready for that much commitment, Mitch.
I don't know how long we can do this for, but that is my promise, is we will end once things actually start to right themselves. But until then, we can either not do anything or we can do the bare minimum.
There was this is maybe jumping ahead of ourselves too quickly. So this morning, not Malcolm Turnbull, who cares? They're all the same. Scott Morrison appeared on the television with David Speer, and they did an interview about Scott Morrison's horrible response to the bushfire so far. Following that, there was a little bit of a wrap-up by some ABC presenters and a Labor MP and a Liberal MP. And I remember the Liberal MP saying like, well, you're never going to appease the critics. Yeah. And I was like,
the critics at
guess
this
what?
point have lost their farms, homes, and is it the most amount of land ever burned by a bushfire season?
Yeah.
Sure is a lot of land.
Yeah. 7 times the size of Singapore at this stage.
But that's the thing about like you can't appease the critics. So I would be so easily appeased by action on climate change. I would shut up.
Yeah.
I would go away.
Give us a carbon tax. I'd be appeased.
That is my biggest fear. Again, not to jump ahead into 5 years from now when we're actually dealing with it, but my biggest fear at the moment is that authoritarian governments the world over can just figure out, it's like, if I just do this one little bit on combating climate change, I can do whatever else I want. That is the horrible equation it might come down to, is just like, is the only way to combat this eco-fascism in 20 to 30 years' time? Maybe. But we have a chance now. And what are we going to do? I'm not an engineer. I can't do stuff to coal machinery. What I can do is talk. So I'm going to do a podcast. Yeah. I also go to rallies. I also volunteer. I also donate. What else can I do? I'm trying my best.
I am in exactly the same situation, except I am an engineer. And I'm so powerless because I'm a software engineer.
And I spend all day trying to tell people what they can do about climate change. And most of it is you personally can't do that much. It's a system thing. We got to get the government to do something.
Yeah. So a big part of getting the government to do something is being informed of what the government is doing and not voting against your interests. So to that end, as McLean brought up just before, our Prime Minister, Malcolm Morrison, or whoever it is, had an interview with...
Hold on a second. If we do get international listeners or whatever...
It's currently Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison is the latest in a long line of Australia's leaders who haven't seen out a term since 2007. So that's what, 13 years now coming up?
Yeah, you would be in high school and you would have never seen a full term if you were born that math.
But regardless, whoever it is, they're all the same.
They could all be played by John Howard, the actor, not the Prime Minister, who could also be played by John Howard.
So this interview was kind of, I think, the tipping point for us in terms of we just need to do something like this podcast, I guess. Because if you don't hear this podcast and a bunch of other podcasts and a bunch of other blogs and a bunch of other YouTube series talking about this, you might think that you're more alone than you actually are.
Yeah.
So a big part of this isn't trying to, convince some dyed-in-the-wool nationals or liberal voters. it's more about almost a solidarity effort.
Yeah.
In terms of making sure that, no, you're not going crazy watching this. You have like-minded people with you, and you can come to us to have your own thoughts gratified.
Echoed back to you.
Exactly. But also you might learn some things along the way. And obviously if you get in touch with us, we can learn some things as we do it as well, which I think would be good.
There's a thing of like, does the world need another white guys podcast? It's like, it certainly doesn't stop the right wingers, and now there are 100 million right wing podcasts, and they completely saturate the info sphere.
As a thing, if the guys from the IPA podcast want to come on board or have us on, you can hit me up.
We will poison you.
But we wanted to talk about this interview just because it's the very start of 2020, which is cool. It is a one-on-one interview between obviously the Prime Minister and an established journalist, I guess, like a bit.
I thought you were just sort of fishing around for a word that wasn't journalist. David Speers.
Definitely a journalist, and definitely obviously someone in a position to get an interview with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, he's certainly more journalist than we are.
Which is going to speak to two of our big problems.
Yeah.
The interview itself, I'm not going to relitigate a whole bunch of stuff that was said, because if you're listening to this podcast, definitely the first one, unless you've gone back, we're super popular now, you've gone back.
Oh, Christ.
Welcome.
Imagine. Oh, Jesus. Sorry about the quality here. It gets much better later on.
Don't make promises, like.
But the main thing is that, like, this is an issue, like, of itself. So anyway, my two big things are...
For those of us who haven't heard the interview, like me, go.
So my two big issues are that I was having crazy flashbacks to almost like 2005, 2006 era of atheists debating Christians. And Scott Morrison's whole way of leading this country is just textbook, like, outspoken Christian. Or outspoken Muslim, as an issue that I've seen on those types of debates, which we'll loop back to. And my other issue is with the journalists who are just so entrenched that the thing that they seem blinded to is how to get ideas across. I don't know if it's the role of journalists to be skewering the Prime Minister and getting him on gotcha questions and now he looks like a fool. But you have to report things in a way that other people will understand. And if it is important enough to have a one-on-one live interview for half an hour with the Prime Minister, you have to be asking questions in a way that people understand. It doesn't matter if you're asking the right question. If you are putting it in a way that none but the most learned ABC readers will understand, you've fundamentally failed in your job as a journalist to deliver information to people. So those two cheery topics, Lane, you can see the interview. Which one would you want to hit first?
Well, yeah, I do want to... I mean, I've already forgotten what the first one was. But Christians. Well, let's skip that one for now. I'm sure we'll come to it. But it's the thing where I think a lot of journalists forget, and maybe it's because it's not actually true anymore, but they're meant to sort of be acting as the eyes and ears of everybody who's not in that room right now. A journalist should be speaking on behalf of the people who want to know things, not speaking on behalf of the person they're interviewing. Because that's not journalism, that's PR. And
that seems to be a big issue with the journalists at the moment, is that there seems to be this almost like media elitism, which is, even if it's true or not, people are picking up on it everywhere around the world. It started obviously with Trump making it a big thing in America. So mainstream media is a big issue. And obviously that's been a calling card of fascism all around the world for hundreds of years, is demonize the media. But we are also seeing more and more obviously with the rise of social media, just how badly, quote unquote, mainstream media treats its audience. Part of that is definitely because it's a for-profit model most of the time. But even then, even with some ABC journalists, we have this issue where they are essentially on the inside, and even if they're doing what they think is good work, they've just been sort of immunized against what good work means now.
They're going into an interview as if the interview takes place without any context at all. I'm a blank slate. I don't know anything. Just tell me whatever you want to tell me.
No. So this is the big thing that I've also got a problem with. This is broader to this interview, but I think it informs it, is that it's even now much harder for the three of us dickheads to criticize both the Prime Minister and this journalist without having the calls of like, oh, he's a good bloke. Like, don't be so mean. Don't be so cruel.
Oh,
and this is something that you and I have talked about a lot, McLean. But this idea of humanizing people so it's harder to discuss their job is pernicious and obvious all the time. And both of those classes have done it to themselves.
Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah, you wouldn't get away with being a shitty taxi driver or a shitty fireman or something if you were a bloody good bloke. And let's be honest, your wife needed a holiday kind of thing.
That's an interesting point, because I think that you can get away with being a shitty taxi driver by being a good person. Like I've had shitty taxi drivers that I've got home and I've been like, that guy was like an absolute dickhead. I'm not talking about like, obviously there's a lot of women out there who have had shitty taxi drivers that are like, irredeemable, like, ended in an assault or something.
That's not shitty, that's criminal.
Yes. If we're sort of like limiting the word shitty to just be like, that guy was kind of a dickhead, like, I'm going to get home, I'm going to give that guy a 5-star review on Uber because I'm like, that's that guy's livelihood and I don't want to wreck that because
he did the job.
But we're not judging your taxi driver. Like, a taxi driver's job is not to provide entertaining company. Like, obviously he shouldn't make you feel threatened or anything, but his job is to get you from place A to B safely.
Exactly.
And if he does that, his personality shouldn't matter.
Exactly. And so the problem that we've got with criticising our politicians at the moment is that we've had all these like daggy dad moments with Scott Morrison. Look at him, he's just cooking up a bloody storm in the kitchen. Maybe we should consider his family on the holiday he wanted to take. No, he's the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Terribly sorry. He gets criticised as a Prime Minister, not as a man.
I think that's the thing, is sort of, I've done a lot of, like, not a lot, but I've done volunteering for like political campaigns. I've seen how much work goes into even like a local council level campaign. There is an ungodly amount of work just to get to that level. So Scott Morrison, Prime Minister, has worked so hard to get where he is and has spent a huge amount of money to get to that position. Obviously, he's making a lot of that money back. But the idea that it's like, oh man, it's just, you can't go too hard on him because he's just a person. It's like, he wanted that job and that job has responsibilities behind it. And if you fuck up those responsibilities, people die en masse. Yeah. And like, ecosystems get destroyed and infrastructure gets destroyed. Like the scale of repercussions if you're doing a really bad job as Prime Minister are about the biggest you can get in the country. So the idea that we need to give him a break, he can resign if he wants a break.
Yeah, exactly.
Go away.
Air traffic controller is maybe a better analogy.
Yeah.
If you fuck up as an air traffic controller, I don't care how nice your kids are.
Exactly. There's also, I think, the same thing of like, the journalist. Didn't want to be criticised about the way they do it. You don't be a journalist. That's fine. You can quit. I've been a public broadcaster now, and some of those texts are brutal. It turns out. But if I didn't want that, I would find other employment, hopefully, or I would pull away, or I would do exactly what the texts say and find myself forever fumbling in the dark trying to appease everyone all the time. So with all that said, let's actually criticise the journalist.
I just want to get in with the journalist thing, because with the journalist as well, if you're like, I'm getting a lot of heat from this, and you say like, just find another job, like, true, just find another job, do that. But with Scott Morrison, he's a very wealthy man. He doesn't need to find another job. He can just stop today, never receive another cent in his life, and he and his family are still set until he's dead.
What is it, $200,000 a year?
It's like $350,000 a year for the Prime Minister. Like, he is not in a position where it's like, if he lost his job today and all of his income ceased for the rest of his life, no impact on his lifestyle.
So then on the idea of Scott Morrison as Prime Minister and Scott Morrison doing a bad job as Prime Minister, I think most people who listen to this would agree with us on that. That's not going to be something that we need to really qualify.
Okay, but for if you're like, hold on a second, he's pretty good. Like, wrong podcast. Listen to some gentler ones first until you're sort of eased over to the...
Any international listener, I've seen a lot of stuff online and people asking like, well, what did he do? Or what sort of was... I saw one footage of the handshake or whatnot, but essentially he's been a bumbling idiot, I think is the way of doing it. He's just sort of been like sort of lost and swaying between evil and self-centered and just completely tonally deaf to the wishes of the population.
More specifically, giant national emergency, and he acted like it wasn't actually a big deal until overwhelming public pressure forced him to admit it was a bigger deal, and he's still only being pushed along just slightly in front of that.
Oh, he still hasn't admitted it's a big deal.
So that's the thing. In this interview, which is supposed to be this big sort of expose and sort of a recap on what happened,
he's been dodging questions for 2 months, and now we've got him for half an hour of questions.
And the first question is, do you you accept responsibility and the optics of this looking bad and you could have done better? And he just started by recapping the tragedy. The first thing out of his mouth was, well, look, 28 people have died. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what?
We're not talking about that. And then he goes on to list some other bad things that have happened. And he started to then list certain facts and figures, and then a fact and figure, and then a fact and figure, and then a fact and figure. And the thing that got me about this and watching this, and this is what was driving me fucking insane watching this, is that this is the exact same thing that you would see on those debates where like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris would team up against like a Catholic crazy person, whatever. The religious mode of operation, or just a bad faith speaker. They do this on all types of politics, but Scott Morrison is very obvious about this. It's this idea of like setting small fires that the interviewer or the opposition can't put out in time.
Yeah.
And so what Scott Morrison does, and you'll see this in pretty much every interview, is he'll either say, well, I've already addressed it, which means you have to go back and find his answer before, or he will list 9 different things that are all bullshit all the way through an answer, but it gives the impression that things are being done and he is answering the question and things are happening. So just like as a quick thing for Lang, who haven't seen this.
Yep.
One of the things he said in this interview was David Speers asked him about the military response, because people have been asking for a very long time, should the Australian Defence Force, at least the reservists, come out and start helping in this situation? And Scott Morrison said, well, actually, David, we had a call out in November. I had to get that approved by the Governor General, but we had almost like a training drill for the reservists to see if they were needed, would they be up to snuff as something that could get done. And we did that in November, and I got that signed off, and we've been working on that. And we have been working on that since November. And then he went on to the next thing, and he listed 5 other things. So in the space of this interview, I'm like, well, okay, I looked up that.
What was the question again?
Not only does that not matter at this point, but that fact that they had a November call out of reservists as a training drill signed off by the Governor General. They did do that. They did. 23 personnel from the ADF were called up and barracked and got their stuff together and then went home. And the training drill was done.
Cool.
But it gives the illusion that stuff's been happening the whole time. And that's all he does all of the time. And I don't think we can understate his like Hillsong religious connections to things. It informs so much of what he does. And for me, it was just crazy watching it being like, well, I've dealt with this a decade ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic, it's called a Gish Gallop,
Yeah,
right?
Gish Gallop.
It's a classic bad faith arguing thing where you just throw out so many crazy arguments that they can't possibly rebut them all. I don't know if it is necessarily linked to a religious thing, but it's certainly used popularly in that kind of debate. But it's any bad faith debater that is fighting against someone who has the facts on their side. You throw out so many facts that they can't possibly, no matter how well informed they are, knock them all back, if they're even trying.
I think that the thing that gets me is like this, the Gish Gallop and the sort of the evasiveness that Scott Morrison and pretty much any other politician in Australia, like you see any of them get like grilled about anything, they will just talk about a different thing, reference like, oh, I've already answered that. The reason that they're all really good at it is because just as a standard part of being a politician in the Labor or Liberal Party is you practice that shit all the time. You'll sit down with a staffer, they will fire questions at you, rapid fire, and you will practice not answering them.
And also you get away with it.
The journalists in Australia do not do the opposite kind of practice where they sit down with just like one of the co-workers or whatever and practice grilling people and holding them to the answers to their questions and saying, hold on a second, you're not answering my core question. They should be doing that. If you are doing that, if you're a journalist for some reason listening to this podcast, like, let us know and do more of it, for fuck's sake.
Well, we had that issue come up recently. The New South Wales Premier, Gladys, was apparently ambushed at a press conference when a journalist decided to ask her pointed questions about strip searching teenagers and minors. Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know the story, there has been, surprise, surprise, a whole bunch of nefarious activity by state police. And in this instance, it was to do with strip searching people, especially underage people, at music festivals and whatnot, looking for drugs. And one independent journalist at one press conference decided to ask her a pointed question about, does that constitute child abuse? And should you be allowing that? Should you be calling into question the like the New South Wales Police Commissioner and whatnot. And the way I heard about that was 3 different news organisations were running about how a journalist ambushed the Premier and took an extreme tone with her. It's like, no, that's the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's considered terribly rude for a journalist to ask questions of a politician at the moment.
So, all right, let's get into our criticism of David Speers, because I think our criticism of Scott Morrison is just, it's obvious.
Yeah.
He didn't answer any question. This is the big one for me. Like, I'd like to know your take on it. When he was asked about what Australia is going to do about climate change, all he said was all the things that they're not doing.
Like what?
Like, well, we're not going to be people aren't going to be losing jobs.
We're not going to be putting a tough tax on people. We're not going to make the
We will not
economy
raise
take a
the
hit.
power bills or blah blah blah.
No. As that was the thing again.
Great. So you're not going to do anything by the sounds of it.
That is his genuine answer.
Yeah. And I mean, at a certain point, why are we allowing journalists at all to not keep the interview going for 4 hours if they have to, and just be like, so what are you doing?
Just ask the same question a few times.
I had this shred of hope when early on in the thing, David Speers asked, almost the first question I think, was like, do you accept responsibility for this? Scott Morrison gave his Gish Gallop waffle. He went through 19 different topics. He said, but the important thing is, and then introduced a new thing about 6 times in the course of that one answer. At one point, he said, now, of course, there are things that I could have done better. And David Speers says, like what? And Scott Morrison talks over that like what. This shred of hope. I was like, oh, he's actually going to he's going to let him Gish Gallop it out. And then he's going to say, now, earlier, you said that there were things that you could have done better. Do you want to give us a couple of examples of those? But instead, the Gish Gallop finished, and David Speers said, moving on, and he asked the next question.
Why are you moving on?
Because he's got other questions to get to. This is the thing for me, and it seems like it's a thing for journalists, at least in Australia, maybe all over the world. But again, this idea of like propriety in interviews, and you do need to move on, and you need to get to the next question, and you really shouldn't hammer the point.
Spend the whole interview on the one question if you have to. Get the answer.
There's also this idea of like they might lose access, they won't get interviews with the Prime Minister and stuff anymore, and it's like at a certain point, that's going to have to be the norm.
Yeah. And at that point, do your interview without the Prime Minister and just report on what he does.
Yeah. It's just ridiculous that this type of it's almost like a lack of solidarity. You're probably not going to get it from the journalists at Murdoch-owned newspapers, at least for a little while. Though maybe if they're in the finance department, they'll get on board with it.
The thing I have with the most journalists, so probably not including David Speers in this, but most journalists are freelancers, and they're the reason that they're so like cowed and unable to answer any kind of pointed question is not like, oh, they'll lose access. It's that they'll lose their job and then they can't make rent. Like, journalism is not a well-paid career in this country.
Yeah.
So your David Speers of the world who have been around for yonks and probably own a house or something, like they I think don't get that excuse. Like David Speers, fucking grow a spine.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
I would give, I think it's unconscionable, but I would give more of a pass to the journalists who just give a complete pass to politicians because they're just like, look, it's this or I'm back on Centrelink, and we all know how bad Centrelink is. So for the international listeners, if you're on welfare in this country, the government will steal money from you afterwards.
Oh my God! Actually, I do want to talk about that at some point.
Yeah,
maybe
not this
later
episode.
Oh boy,
we're already 26 minutes in.
And this is the thing. This is the other thing that struck me was the insider tone that Speers took, or what he decided to focus on.
It was pally.
So it wasn't really. It's more that it was, if you know the term wonkery, which is just very politically insider.
Yeah.
So there was one section where, I mean, this isn't the exact question, it doesn't fucking matter, but it was essentially like they were talking about the Australian Defence Force being rolled out across the country to fight the fire, and essentially the questioning was, is this going to be a problem in terms of like oversight? Are we going to have generals like directing climate change action from now on? Isn't there a risk that the military being on the streets all the time is bad? Maybe. Like, what's the oversight? That already is a question, so no one really gives a shit about that. That's one of the things that I'm almost to the point of like, that's not important now.
Yeah.
Like, what is important now is helping the survivors of fires and talking about climate change.
Yeah.
What isn't important now is talking about the constitutional oversight that needs legislative change for the ADF to be rolled out statewide without their permission.
Yeah.
And that was asked, that question was hammered so many more times than what would you have done differently?
That point was the main discussion of the two MPs wrapping up after the interview.
Jesus
Yeah, the time to talk about militarization of the country is when you're giving your cops guns at the airport, or when you're doing literally anything Australia is doing with immigration.
But that's the
it's
thing.
not climate change.
But this is my point from the start of what we were talking about, is this whole if you're a journalist, you have to put things in a way that people care about. And no one gives a shit if Scott Morrison is going to table legislation to change the constitutional oversight of the ADF reserves to be rolled out for statewide legislation being asked in the It's like, just shut the fuck up. That doesn't help anyone right now. This isn't the point. And then there were a couple of other questions, Lang. I don't know if you would have asked this of Scott Morrison. But how do you reckon the hard-hitting question of will you take more holidays in Australia from now on went down?
Jesus, that's softball.
Hey, man.
No,
hey,
it speaks to his national pride.
Everybody bloody loves a holiday.
That was the hard-hitting question of, like, why'd you go to Hawaii, ScoMo, instead of beautiful South Australia?
So for context, our Prime Minister at the start of the fire season, at the start of this issue, went on holiday to Hawaii.
I'm going to hold you there. About a month and a half into the fire season.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Shit was on fire.
Yeah. Shit was definitely on fire. Didn't tell anyone. It wasn't it wasn't discussed. And then one thing he said was, are you going to tell people about it later? He's like, well, I texted Anthony Albanese, who is the leader of the opposition. That's how he announced to the country that we had someone else as caretaker Prime Minister and that everyone would be aware that the Prime Minister was out, was he texted his mate Albo, who is the leader of the opposition party.
Opposition's a strong word.
So this would essentially be like Donald Trump going on a secret holiday to Turkey, and the only way he lets the media know is texting Bernie Sanders. I mean, that's it.
That's not out of character for Donald Trump.
But that was then a question that was brought up, and I can't help but think that, like, I don't know how someone like Spears thinks up that question. And, like, I don't know, honestly, the heart of man. I don't know. I'm not accusing him of anything. But I do not know why you would write that down on your piece of paper of questions you can give to the Prime Minister in half an hour and be like, this is going to get me the answer that is going to make the moment.
What are the top 5 questions here?
Maybe he's gone, okay, I've gone hardball. Let's end it with a softball. Everyone feels good. I get invited to the journalist ball. But all the hardballs got softballed as well.
But it's not even like the problem was that he was on holiday, not where.
Well, I mean, the problem is that he's not taking meaningful action on climate change. And he's dooming us all to die. And David Speers, that includes you. Yeah. And it includes your family. Like, there's so many of, like, the sort of the press in Australia. This is including everybody doing the wrap-up afterwards. Like, I finished that interview ashen-faced, knowing that even when they're like, oh, we've got half an hour to sit down with Morrison and we're going to grill him about climate change, and he didn't say anything, and I'm sitting there looking at my screen like, oh, we are dead. Yeah. We're genuinely dead. And then it cuts back to the ABC and they're like, some strong questions there for Scott Morrison. do you not realise that you just got sentenced to death? Do you not have a reaction to that?
Is this the continent we live on? I'm not sure. I haven't seen any fires.
The Liberal MP coughed a couple times during the wrap-up and he's like, oh yeah, the smoke in Sydney, it's getting to me as well. Like, you'll die, dude. Yeah. You'll die and your children will die and you won't have grandchildren. Like,
this is not a one-off also. Like, this year we had the hottest year in Australian recorded history, the hottest month, about 6 of the hottest days, I think. We hit 1.5 degrees over...
Hell yeah.
We hit about 1.5 degrees over the average for the century.
Oh, in the climate change Olympics, we are bringing home a lot of gold.
That was a little taste because 1.5 degrees is about as good as we're going to get. But with the current way we're going, we're heading for 4 to 6. Okay, so this is a good year. We're going to get worse years unless we really step it up.
That's Scott Morrison's narrative there is like, this, because they're already pivoting like from climate change isn't real to like, of course it's real, but there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, nothing we can do.
This is the most dangerous.
He was saying like, this is the new normal and we need to be concentrating on like how we respond to bushfires and rebuild afterwards. It's not the new normal. This is step 1 on a very, very steep staircase.
Yeah.
And every year is going to be this much again.
This is the other thing.
Until we act on it.
David fucking Speers wasted time asking where the Prime Minister is going to go on holidays in the future. Scott Morrison brought up during the climate mitigation and climate adaptation, he brought up the problem with drought. And that was just left. There was no point. It was just like, you're talking about drought. Is this to do with the fact that the Liberal Party have sold all of our water to overseas interests and mines?
Yeah.
Is that not an issue for drought management? It was just like, well, he said he's going to deal with drought, so I guess that's a good thing. It's like that is the fucking issue.
Yeah, the Murray River, a major river in Australia, runs dry in some sections because so much of it has been diverted to cotton farms that a lot of our MPs have business interest in.
We are training water to mines owned by foreign interests. Like, I don't really give a fuck who owns mines anymore either.
They could be owned by local interests, whatever.
I'm not anti foreign investment in mining because it's foreign. I don't want Australian-owned mines.
I want our climate death to be at the hands of Australians.
We're buying the rights for water off cotton farmers just because they're higher upstream, so that water can run further downstream, and then it's actually not clear whether that water does get released or not.
But yeah. This is my big thing, big takeaway from it is the climate mitigation, but the climate adaptation is the scary thing. It's like Scott Morrison pivoting to say that this is the new normal requires those with a platform to start hammering the fact that we don't have to do that, and that's defeatism.
It was a really easy pivot because he has been saying this is normal. Now he's saying this is the new normal.
Yeah. Oh, I've been saying that it's normal for years.
Did you not,
bushfires have always happened.
Did you not hear me say new normal that whole time? I haven't. I've definitely been saying.
I've been saying that it's the new normal for decades.
And this is the thing as well, is that we are going to be gaslit by our politicians and certain sectors of the media.
Oh, Mitch, they wouldn't lie to us.
If the rest of the media don't fucking pull their socks up and actually do it properly, I can't get too aggressive.
They're gonna be saying, oh well, look, in a summer that is 50 degrees, we can't run the risks of turning off your mum and dad's air conditioners just to shut down some coal power plants.
And that's the thing, is it also gets harder. The more time that our cities are spent blanketed in smoke is the more time that we cannot rely on solar power. Like, everything is a feedback loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, the solar power, I wouldn't actually go that far with that one because I'm not actually sure that's true. But the point is, coal power plants. Where are the coal power plants? They're in Gippsland. What's on fire at the moment? It's Gippsland. What's flammable? Coal power plants.
Yeah.
You have centralized infrastructure, and every time that our power grids go down, it's usually a coal power plant going down. You've got centralized power infrastructure that is way more vulnerable to any disaster. If there's a solar panel on nearly every house, if there's a wind farm scattered in 20 places around the state, you've got resilience. And that's what we need.
But there's also reports coming out now that we're going to have rolling brownouts and blackouts across our summers from now on. Because the coal-fired plants that we have set up, their infrastructure is old and failing.
Yeah.
It's not even to do with the climate emergency happening around that and outside of that. It's just that they're old and shit and we should have upgraded them and we didn't. So if we're going to upgrade them, let's just do wind farms and shit.
Yeah.
But I think this is the main point I want to come back to for this episode and bring it back, I guess.
The important thing you need to consider, David, is...
Yeah, David, mate. But this is the thing. If you have a platform, you need to be using it properly. And if you don't have a platform, you build one. Like what we've just done.
If you don't have a platform, get two mates over.
If David Spears isn't going to fucking do it, the three of us are going to do it, and that's heaps worse. You've already got TV crews, national exposure. We're going to be doing it, and it's not the best for the nation.
We're here because you forced us to be David Spears.
Exactly.
And also, keep in mind, if you're a journalist just starting out or a couple of years into your career and you're like, yeah, but if I go too hard, what's going to happen to my career path? Here's a spoiler. If we don't go hard, you don't have a career path. I'm set to retire in maybe 40 years. At this rate, superannuation's not going to exist at that point unless we fix this thing.
That is my other thing, essentially to ABC journalists as well, because they are extremely hamstrung by what they can and can't say. Nothing can look like political activism. Nothing can even hint at favouring one side of politics over the other. And I think that is fantastic to have. We need some media outlet somewhere that will not advocate or that there's no fear that they are advocating through vested interests with advertisers. We are beyond the point now where you can run the risk of having a climate discussion be political. It's in our goddamn faces. It is covering our cities. And so you have a moral...
It is political.
You have a moral and a career obligation now to hammer politicians that aren't taking this seriously and that aren't doing enough on it. Because again, like you keep saying, McLean, we all live in the same earth. I do not understand this...
You're in it. You're in it as well. The thing that
trapped on the podcast with us.
The thing that gets me about the journalists having to remain neutral on these political issues is that you have a right of reply when somebody calls you out for being political, like, oh, that was too political, you're biased because you asked him a pointed question about climate change. You can then publish a thing saying, no, we didn't. That was right. That was neutral. It's neutral to be a climate change activist because it's neutral to not want to die.
Yeah.
Like that, not wanting to die is a neutral position. And the thing, ABC journalist talking to you still, is that if you do stay neutral, you will still get hammered for bias. And you can see that. They will say the worst shit about you anyway, no matter what.
You are going to get hammered.
Yeah.
Go hard.
Yeah.
And climate change is not inherently political. It's been made political. It's no more political than tobacco causing cancer or asbestos causing cancer or anything else like that. If there was one side of politics that said, nah, but we bloody need asbestos, and if you're trying to take away good Aussie asbestos, that's political.
Hold on a second.
They've politicized it.
They have politicized it. But I've got to say that it is important that we can engage in our reconstruction efforts following the bushfires without a bunch of red tape that we need to get through. What better way to fireproof things?
And I will say there is some good stuff happening both on the ABC and in other places. It's not impossible. If Paul Culliver on RN Radio can have an actually fantastic interview with the Prime Minister where he's forced to confront his blubbering bullshit and just pointedly dodge questions in a way that doesn't make him look good, then David Speers can do it on a live, televised, camera using interview where you have to look at Scott Morrison's fucking face and see him, and this is the other thing as well, see him lying.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem as well is that journalists worry about the defamation laws in Australia. If you don't know about our defamation laws, whether you're in Australia or not, they are very strict and they work very well for rich people because you have to go through court and it takes a lot. It's very scary if you're on the other side of that whole thing. But as far as it goes at this point, when it's an apolitical subject like climate change, just call them liars, and they're liars unless they can prove otherwise. That should be the standard.
Also, I mean, it would be so nice to see Scott Morrison take David Speers to court over him being accused of lying about a climate change thing. It's like, now you're in court, dude.
Yeah.
You got to put evidence up.
And there are
you
Australian...
can't gish gallop a judge.
Which would be the same as the Australians editorial, which we might do in a future episode soon. Which is, again, that issue of that's the gaslighting we'll see. That's what I should have said earlier. We're going to get gaslit by sectors of the media and our politicians because it's extremely hard for anyone in Australia with a platform to publicly call out people based on their intentions because of the defamation laws. It's very hard to actually say Sheree Markson is a... Our defamation laws are just so strict that it's very hard to go, actually, I think the Australians editorial board are lying right now. Whereas what should be the case is you go, well, you've released this one editorial that says you've always said that climate change is real, and we've got 15 years of headlines showing that you don't think that's the case. So maybe let's put it in front of a judge to see who thinks that. Maybe let's have you produce other documentation about that.
And what we also have are extremely good records of budget, emissions, everything. It is just absolutely watertight how badly we have been doing on climate change at every level, and all of the missed opportunities we've had to do good things about it. And when journalists go in to an interview pretending that none of that evidence really exists, and someone says, oh, look, we've been doing a great job at climate change, and the journalists don't pull out all of the evidence that says, well, you've done FA...
Yeah, the thing with Speers as well, but when Scott Morrison's like, oh, we're doing good stuff on climate change, Speers could have come back with the strong rejoinder of, are you aware that Australia is an international laughingstock?
Yeah.
And we are the worst performing on climate change in the world.
We rated an F on doing anything about climate change, and an A on gonna be effed up by climate change.
Which, again, speaks to the problem we have with some journalists in this country not speaking to the people who actually need to hear their work, is that he does bring up rollover credits, and he brings it up twice and then and then he just moves on to the next thing, because obviously, like you said, you were talking to me today about it, he's got 2 HP for every question, and he takes the smallest amount of damage. He's like, well, moving on.
He doesn't want to bore the audience with the same question.
Yeah. What colour hat are you wearing, ScoMo? Well, there's a lot of hats that all of us wear across the time of our lives. Okay, but what colour hat are you wearing, ScoMo? Well, you see, everybody wears a hat sometimes. Anyway, moving on. Thanks for your good answer to the hat question.
It's this. So seeing Spears mention rollover credits like a couple of times, without giving any context to why that really matters.
Yeah.
A better way of framing it would have been what you just said, is saying, Mr. Prime Minister, Australia is the laughingstock of the international community. Well, actually, I was going to say, and why do you think that is? And he's just going to say, well, I don't believe that we are.
I reject the premise of that question.
Exactly, and that's when you just go, well, we are. So why do you think that is? Well, I reject the premise. Well, I'm not moving on from this.
Now, Prime Minister of Australia, have you not been paying attention to the Australia standing in the international community, or
Just
Instead of asking the politician to give you the facts, give them the facts. Say, so we're stuffing up Kyoto, we're releasing this much, and our coal exports are bigger than they've ever been. What does that mean for rollover credits? He can't say, oh, well, that's not true, because it is true. Here's the stats.
But just to play devil's advocate, I'm very good at it. I'm a white man in my 30s. So the issue then is, will we just have our journalists going back and forth with facts and figures? Because he did give out facts, and then Scott Morrison just gives facts. He's like, well, actually, and he's like, that wet-lipped fucking munching sound at the start of every answer, that smug.
now you're doing it.
It's the same
People
thing,
need
though.
to be angry or keep the fire alive. Listen to my Wex Max. But I want to just. So the issue that I've got is that Scott Morrison, when presented with facts, will just have these counterfactuals of, oh, well, actually, we've reduced our emissions by 50,000 tons or 50 million tons, whatever it was, and we're on track to beat our Paris signature emissions target. Now, that's bullshit, but what then for a journalist like David Speer to do when a Prime Minister says that, and then he goes, well, actually, we're not, and the Prime Minister goes, well, actually, we are.
Well, you, as the journalist, you go in knowing your facts, and also it's the same with the Gish Gallop in general. You don't let them change the subject. You go, hang on, yeah. All whatever stats you're saying aside, what about this stat? You pick one of the ones that you can really leverage on them, and there are a lot.
And I think a big issue though is that then this gets into what a public is willing to put up with.
Sure, you pick the stats that the public cares about. Like if we say, oh, Australians' emissions are only 1 point whatever percent of the world, you go, yeah, nah. Australia's emissions are more like 5%. Because most of our emissions are the ones we export. And when you tell Australians that it's our power consumption we need to worry about, you're putting all the guilt on them instead of, your big corporations. And that's something Australians would love to hear is, it's not really your fault.
Yeah.
It's the fault of all this shit we're shipping off elsewhere.
And I think another part of that is, again, like, to shut myself up, is that, like, well, what would Australians care about? What facts they care about? We have an overwhelming consensus, like we did with marriage equality. The majority of Australians want action on climate change.
Exactly.
60-something% would prefer a World War II level mobilization to act on climate change. I've talked about this before. The climate debate in Australia has been had and won. People want climate action. The only obstacle to climate action is the politicians.
It's the games of the politicians and the media class that enable them.
Yeah.
Which is an issue that I don't want to get all French Revolution about, but something has to be done.
Well,
I don't know what, but something French Revolution style has to be done.
This is my one big hope from this bushfire thing, is it has finally created a climate event that the media cannot ignore. And it means that we've also created a thing that normal Australians are talking about, because that's the one thing we've been missing. Everyone cares about climate change. Everyone's scared of it. The stats are all there. The studies have been done. Everyone would happily sacrifice, the vast majority of people care about it, are scared about it, and would happily sacrifice to do something about it. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
But now people are talking about it. And now people are saying that everyone else cares and is scared about it. The quiet Australian thing, that is a lie that has been happily destroyed by this bushfire thing, because you can see exactly how much the so-called quiet Australians care about bushfires, climate change, and everybody else in Australia.
Yeah.
No, we're forcing people like us to talk about it publicly.
That's the most disgusting thing.
This is the worst bit. The worst bit is that there's now another podcast out there with us talking about it. Like we're semi-literate and semi-qualified to talk about. I think between us, the three of us, we would make one qualified person on one media to talk about it. But I mean, Yeah, I think that's the mission statement of this podcast. Is like, you forced our hand, and we have to be contributing to this, because if our fucking journalists aren't going to be doing it, someone has to be.
Yeah, we've turned off our light bulbs. We've stopped eating meat. None of that did anything. We are now
called my
speaking
MP.
to power.
I've written to my MP. I've got out the vote. I've voted. I've volunteered. I've been to rallies, and I've been doing all those things for like 25 years now. And this is where we are.
Yeah.
But not yet have I tried a podcast. The thing that no, this one podcast is the tiniest drop in a bucket. I don't have any illusions that this is gonna actively like change, like fix anything. But we need to get more people talking about it, and this is one thing that I can do.
And it's not making things worse, and it's low carbon.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
I think the idea is that, if you're listening to this, and you feel as angry and or inspired as we do, also do something.
Yep.
Start that blog up. Start filming yourself on YouTube. You will be surprised how many views some gronk with a webcam in front of a white screen talking unedited for 45 minutes gets.
Yeah.
There are careers based on that. And at this point, there is something to be said for tiny, like lots and lots and lots of micro media getting out there and affecting minds. So listen to this and then come on this podcast. Have us on yours. Start your own. Do a blog.
Chuck a video on an Instagram story saying, I'm Australian, I'm terrified of the bushfires, and I'm really disappointed that our politicians haven't done anything about climate change. That's the whole video. You don't need to do anything more than that. And that is still more than fucking David Spears did this morning.
And also, because the internet is a poisonous hellhole, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your community. Community is what we need. It's the only thing that can stop a couple of really rich people is a whole lot of poor people, and you all need to be talking about it. We all need to be doing something about it.
If you don't have like 10 million plus, you're a poor person. That's like the what's that quote that was going around?
There was a really good tweet that someone put out there a little while ago.
You're 3 bad weeks away from homelessness.
Just to figure out where you are in the class war, if you are 3 bad months away from total poverty, but you're not 3 good months away from being a millionaire, you're part of the proletariat. That's just you're part of our class. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And again, there are a lot of lumpen bourgeoisie in this country. There are a lot of aspirational careerists who think that they're part of the upper class, and maybe they have some vested interest in this. You don't.
Yeah.
You're in it with us. You're on the barricades and in the trenches with us. And again, I promise you, if things turn around and an actual climate framework for action is set up in this country, if we take actual steps to mitigate Australia's role in the current and ongoing climate emergency, we will shut this podcast down. But until then...
in a heartbeat.
But until then, we will continue this bullshit until something is done.
Christ.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like the pod, we're on Twitter @NotGoodPod and the website notgoodpod.com. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye.